Hey everybody, welcome into the Baseball America studios here in beautiful Durham, North Carolina. I'm Kyle Glaser alongside J.J. Cooper.
Hello.
We're here to talk about the trade deadline. Exciting stuff already happening. This was originally going to be a trade deadline preview, but then the teams got started. Manny Machado got traded, Brad Hand got traded, Juris Familia got traded. J.J., I want to talk a little bit about just all the trades that have happened already. We've talked to a lot of evaluators around the game about the quality of these trades, the quality of the prospect returns, as well as look ahead to what's coming because we still got 9 days to the deadline and there's a lot of trades still to be made. First of all, the big one was Machado. We saw the Dodgers upgrade the position they needed to, just given the Corey Seager injury. They added, I wouldn't say arguably, easily, the most impactful offensive player available at the deadline.
I'm trying to imagine who would surprisingly become available that would top that.
And they did
Bryce
it all,
Harper? No,
and they did it all without giving up anyone who was either in their present lineup or really projected to be in their future everyday lineup. Maybe one player, but they have a lot of depth at that position. So first of all, just the Dodgers getting Manny Machado, for me, it makes them the favorite, the clear favorite in a NL that no one's really kind of started to run away from.
No, there is no. I don't think there's any clear runaway favorite in the NL, and I think right now the reality is, if you looked at it and you compared the AL to the NL, you would say take any one of about 4 or 5 teams from the AL. If you take the Astros, you took the Yankees, you took the Red Sox, you took the Indians, and you plop them in the NL, they'd probably be the runaway favorite.
Agreed.
And instead, you're going to have teams that are like, one of these is going to be just trying to survive a wild card game. And then beyond that, you're going to have very potentially 2 ALDSs that are just going to be
Brutal.
Insane.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing you hit on with the Dodgers is they get Manny Machado, but what they do is UCLDS is a very good prospect. He immediately we got him as the best prospect in the Orioles system. But at the same time, if you look at him with the Dodgers and you say, okay, well, when was he going to play for the Dodgers? Well, right now, he's not going to play. They have Yasiel Puig. They have Chuck Peterson. They have Chris Taylor, who, by the way, I know he's been playing shortstop, but now they traded Manny Machado. Chris Taylor's going to move back out there.
Andrew Tolles. They had to demote Tolles to AAA. By the way, Alex Verdugo's still in AAA.
Alex Verdugo is a better up the middle center field prospect than Yusniel Diaz. And either if you have to put him in a corner, he's still probably he's a better outfield prospect than Yusniel Diaz. You look at the pitchers that they traded. There's not a pitcher that they traded in this deal. Dean Kramer, I like him, but he's not their first best pitching prospect. He's not their second best. He's not their
third or fourth.
Right. So they were able to make a trade where they traded prospect depth that's really surplus for them, and they got the best player who was available on the market. That's
a testament, A, to the big league team they built, and B, the prospect depth they've built. But just because the Dodgers, did that and didn't give up anyone that was going to really make or break their franchise, doesn't mean the Orioles did a bad job. I think one constant theme we heard when we talked to evaluators and scouts throughout the game, because we know what we think, but the insiders in the game, what they think. All things considered, given that Manny Machado is a rental, he'll be a free agent in a few months. For the most part, there was a sense of, hey, the Orioles did okay for themselves. They got someone who is going to be an everyday outfielder. Now, there's degrees of that, how good he'll be, but there seems to be agreement. Diaz will be an everyday outfielder. Bannon, there's a chance to potentially be a utility guy. Kramer, whether it might be more of a swingman, but it's a big league arm. And Zach Pop, who's got a 96-mile-an-hour sinker with a slider that flashes above average, there's a chance that they'll probably get 2 definite big leaguers out of this, possibly a third one. And for a rental, you can't really ask for much more.
That's the reality of it is with all these trades. Go back last year. If we want to talk about, there have been exceptions. You look at the Aroldis Chapman Gleyber Torres trade. That was an exception for a rental. But the reality of it is if you look at most of the trades, JD Martinez, I don't think we'll have any position player make more of an impact over the second half of the season or the post-trade deadline period of time than JD Martinez did last year for the Diamondbacks. And look at the return that the Tigers got for him. And JD Martinez, it wasn't like he all of a sudden started doing this after he got traded. This was who JD Martinez is. And he got back 3 shortstops, and none of whom may end up being big league regulars. So you look at these rentals, and trade after trade, the rentals, the return ends up being less than we expected because the reality is as we've had multiple front office officials tell us, is that you're just not going to get multiple impact prospects for a rental, no matter how good the rental is.
You know, I even think back to 10 years ago when the Angels acquired Mark Teixeira from the Braves, and in return only had to give back Casey Kochman and Steven Merrick, whereas the year before, when Teixeira had that extra year, he brought back a package that set the Rangers on the path to their back-to-back World Series. So it's the same player. You know, Mark Teixeira, when he went to the Angels, was magnificent, propelled them to 100 wins, but went to the Yankees the next year and was a starting first baseman on a World Series team. He was still plenty talented, but the contract made all the difference in the world.
But the other thing that stands out with this is that this also does mean, as a reminder we talk about every year, everyone can trade. It does not matter how thin your farm system is. If you are a team that needs to upgrade, especially if you are talking about, like, okay, if you need a couple of relievers in the pen, are you willing to take on salary? If you are, you can get that, and it's not going to cost you your best prospect.
You can get a solid starter if you're willing to eat salary. We saw the Mariners last year get Mike Leake for kind of a non-prospect in Radar Ascanio.
But, okay, well, do you need a good glove backup infielder, middle infielder? You're going to basically, if you need that, you're pretty much going to just be fighting off which teams are begging you to take their guy. Again, the Alcides Escobars and guys like that, you could have pretty much just for taking them.
Well, it's funny you mention that because we saw a lot of teams interested in Machado. You look at the Phillies, you look at the Brewers, two teams that are making playoff runs, are desperate for help at shortstop, and the Phillies in particular, their third base production has been very so-so. And after Machado, when you look at the shortstop market, it's, Jordy Mercer, Jose Iglesias. Now, Jordy Mercer and Jose Iglesias are better than what the Brewers and Phillies have been throwing out there.
But it's not going to cost you much to get them.
It's not going to cost you much to get them, but I think it also represents, that's a significant drop-off. And partially, I think, why Machado's price, even for a rental, was relatively high, because after him, there's not much shortstop help left.
We saw with the Mets. The Mets traded Juris Familia, their closer. He goes to the A's. Great pickup for the A's. The A's now have a two-headed, again, it doesn't really matter who pitches the ninth, but you have, between Familia and Blake Treinen at the back end, you have two guys who you feel very confident, look, whoever's pitching the eighth, whoever's pitching the ninth, we're not giving up runs there pretty much. Those are two excellent relievers. They have a little depth in front of that as well. You put it all together, they have a weak starting pitching staff, but they have a really good bullpen now. But there was understandable this reaction, the Mets didn't get nearly enough for Familia. And I get it, I understand it in some ways, because you would think that the New York Mets, they're based in New York, should be a team that is willing to say, you know what, A's, Oakland A's, one of the smallest revenue teams in baseball, you know what, we want better prospects, we'll cover the rest of Familia's salary, or most of it, and then up the rate of prospects we're going to get. But that said, if you compare what the Mets got for Familia to another very good reliever who has already been traded, Kelvin Herrera, from the Royals to the Nationals, compare those packages. Bobby Wall's probably the guy I like best of all the five guys that you have in those trades. And the reality of it is that, again, relievers, rental relievers, it's very different when you talk about Brad Hand. We're going to talk about Brad Hand. Multiple years of team control, very different story.
At a low salary as well.
Rental relievers, the price is not going to be that steep. Again, I always go back, you brought up the Angels. Look at the year that the Angels won 97 games a few years ago. And they started the year with the worst bullpen probably in baseball.
98.
Started with the worst bullpen in baseball probably. And they made moves to bring in Houston Street, and they figured a way to rebuild the bullpen in season with the worst farm system in baseball at the time. And if you look at the guys that they traded, there was not one guy they traded, I think you look back on and go, oh, they wish they'd had that one back.
Jose Rondon was the top prospect they traded, but the moment that trade was made...
He's bounced around multiple times since.
And, he got to the big leagues, utility. But even at the time the trade was made, I was in Southern California covering Inland Empire and Elsinore. It was pretty clear the Padres didn't really get anyone of value back. I mean, Rondon potentially, but it clearly didn't pan out. But the Angels made a move, and
they took on salary.
You take on salary, and so that's kind of the point, is rental relievers, like you said, especially if you take on salary, the Mets didn't. But you're not going to get a huge package.
And here's the other thing with
Aroldis Chapman accepted, but he's a different animal.
Andrew Miller, those are and everybody had multiple years. Yeah. But here's the thing. Bobby Wall could end up being nothing for the Mets. There's absolutely that possibility. He's had, if we talk about injury, we could just roll off injury after injury after injury. He's had injury problems going back to his college career. At the same time, Bobby Wall right now is pitching the best he's ever pitched in AAA. He's been absolutely dominant. He has a high 90s fastball. I mean, that's 90. It's touched 100 before, but you're seeing 96, 97, 98 regularly. If you said that Bobby Wall, because the ceiling with relievers is very, very hard to predict with accuracy. I would go out and say, when we talk about Brad Hand, when the Padres claimed Brad Hand off waivers, no one was saying, well, for one, he was obviously coming off waivers. No one was saying, whoa.
From the Marlins.
But no one was saying, wow, they just got a future, impact reliever.
All-star, yeah. Agreed.
Bobby Wall could end up being nothing, but Bobby Wall could end up being a very good setup man at least, depending on staying healthy, throwing strikes, all these little varieties. We talk about the A's. Blake Treinen was not a guy coming up through the minors.
And last year even, he was really scuffling with Washington when he went to Oakland in that trade with in exchange for Doolittle and Madsen with the prospects.
So, again, Bobby Wall is a guy who I look at and say, does he have the attributes where it is possible? He misses bats. He throws in the high 90s. He has a second pitch that works. Now, we're not talking about that second pitch is like he has 270s on the card. But he has two pitches. He could end up being a very useful reliever for the Mets. And by the way, now he's old, he's 26, and he hasn't really established himself in the big leagues. But he is a guy who you look at and say, but he can potentially do this. That's what you're looking at in these kind of trades.
And I think, for the most part, I feel like there's almost a visceral reaction. Oh, the Orioles didn't get enough. The Mets got, a really bad return. But in reality, given the circumstances and speaking with the values around the game, in both cases, there's a sense of they really did do overall. I don't, say the best they could have gotten because you never really know what the other packages on the table were. But a sense that there's nothing here that's beyond ordinary when you compare similar type of deals in the last year or so.
We've looked at this. We've looked at all the trades that happened at the deadline for the last 6-7 years. And one of the things that stands out is now, every now and then, there will be a trade and someone will hit it big on a prospect. And usually what happens, again, we're not talking about, yes, the Yankees hit it big on Glaber Torres, but Glaber Torres was an elite prospect when he was traded.
Josh Donaldson.
We're talking about, Josh Donaldson, Corey Kluber. Every now and then, a team will get a guy who was considered a modest talent at best, and he turns into a star. And then when that happens, you won that trade. And then for every one of those trades, there's going to be another 10 where the team that traded away the big leaguer never, ever, ever came close to getting the return of what that big leaguer gave over the final 2 months of the season. And you know what? That's how these trades work. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
I would like to point you back to the study I did last year, which showed less than 20% of prospects traded at the deadline turn into big leaguers of consequence, and obviously all the big leaguers they're traded for remain big leaguers.
No, not always, but some of those end up being terrible. But yes, you feel much more confident.
They're physically in the major leagues. Yes. Which kind of I want to pivot into this next. The last of the big three deals, the second one chronologically. Mm-hmm. Padres sending Brad Hand and Adam Simber, who did a pretty good rookie reliever for them, to the Indians for Francisco Mejia. And it's interesting because Mejia, the 50-game hit streak a few years ago, made him very, very famous. He's always, switch hitter, young, put up high averages, like a lot of things you like to see. But it's interesting, when we talk about elite prospects, we bounce stuff off of scouts, and sometimes when it's a dude, it's just raves. Whether it was Ronald Acuna last year, Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
Juan Soto, you could not talk to a scout now about Juan Soto who's not just like, wow.
And I remember talking to someone about Mejia both at the end of last year and in May, and you didn't get that. You got a lot of, I don't love the approach. The exact words I got this May were, quote unquote, he can't catch. And we heard a little bit about that at the end of last year too. So on the one hand, look, after a slow April, he's really performed. There's still this great hitter's pedigree in there. But I thought it was interesting, this automatic, oh my God, the Padres got a steal, and maybe time will tell that they did. But I do think there's a little more hesitation when we talk to evaluators within the industry about just how much of a slam dunk Francisco Mejia may be as opposed to maybe, kind of common discourse?
Well, I mean, we have bumped him down a little bit on our top 100 throughout the year, and that's because we are hearing things like this. Now, I would describe him as a high ceiling, high risk prospect, because the ceiling for Francisco Mejia is if he can catch. Again, we're not talking about be a Gold Glove. We're talking about can he catch, be a 50 and an average defender, and he's always hit. The hand-eye is absolutely elite, which allows him to get away with some things that most hitters cannot. So you put that all together and you say, okay, so here are the positives. So let's say the Padres could end up getting a average defender who hits 280, 290 with some pop.
Double-digit home runs.
Double-digit, everything. And by the way, if you get that a catcher, look at your AL All-Star catchers this year if you want a reminder of how hard that would be to do. Okay, so that's one side. Now, at the same time, though, when you compare him to a guy like Gleyber Torres, who was traded a few years ago, when Gleyber Torres was traded, there was very strong confidence among everyone, scouts that we talked to, that he was going to hit. He was going to hit for average, he was going to hit for power. And there was very strong confidence. Maybe he's not a shortstop, but if he's not a shortstop, he's a second baseman, he's a third baseman, it's an impact on that. With Mejia, there is much less confidence that he's going to catch. Agreed. We got that from both. We both got that. From
Not saying it's impossible. The Padres are setting him to a pass.
The hands are a little hard.
They're going to catch him, but yes,
the hands are a little hard.
Work on.
The other concern is that his approach at the plate is not normally the approach of an elite hitter. Now, again, there are guys who make adjustments. He has adjustments to make. He's not, when you talk about balance at the plate, he's not a guy who stays balanced at the plate. He gets caught front foot. There are things he does that are, that scouts have told us, scouts we trust, that there are concerns. But again, you also say, as one of the youngest hitters in most leagues he's been generally very good. He's done that while catching for the majority of his career, which
it's very difficult.
Very difficult. And if you look, there are a lot of catchers who start really hitting a lot older than they do at other prospects in other positions.
27.
Manny Pena at last year, age 30, it's like, hey, this is great. But so you see that, and so you say, okay, high ceiling, but also a guy's high risk, low floor, because if he can't catch and the approach gets in the way for him, we could turn around 3-4 years from now and be saying, he still hasn't really established himself. And you do look at it, we talked about surplus. Again, this is a team, this is a situation. I can't map out a scenario where Yan Gomes stays healthy and Francisco Mejia was going to be the Indians' everyday catcher in 19 or 20 or probably 21.
Right.
And you put that together, as long as they're contending, he's not going to be making that jump.
And I do think in that sense, look, it's a trade that makes sense for both teams. Lord knows the Indians need bullpen help, and I think it's important too.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Padres have so much pitching that they think they can develop another Brad Hand.
Agreed. And I think right now you look at Brad Hand, you look at Adam Simber, it's important that Hand is signed through 2021. Simber, this was his rookie year. He's got 5 more years after this. So the Indians didn't just trade, their top prospect for the rental. And that's where the difference comes in between what the Padres get back for Hand and Simber as opposed to what the Mets get back for Familia. Overall, I am curious, just what did you think of that deal? Because I think a lot of times we've seen it's multiple prospects for veterans. Rarely we see 2 veterans for 1 prospect.
Well, but again, now, at the same time, we just gave some of the concerns with Mejia. Mejia is being considered a top 30 prospect for the last several years. He is probably the best prospect on our top 100 who will be traded.
I agree.
And so that's the reality of it is when you look at it, you say, okay, 1 player for 2, that is weird, that is unusual, 1 prospect for 2 big leaguers. But it's also unusual nowadays for a prospect of that caliber to be traded at the trade deadline, period. And so because of that, you do look at it and say, okay, it makes sense from that standpoint. Obviously, the Padres believe that they can develop Mejia behind the plate. And this is a team that really does not have a they can keep trying Austin Hedges. Austin Hedges hasn't hit yet. Defensively fine, but hasn't hit.
Well, I think where this also works for them, though, is even if Francisco Mejia something stalls or they get him in El Paso, they watch him for half a year, take him in through camp and say, this isn't what we want, they still have opportunities to put him in left field, to potentially try him out at third base. Those are positions the Padres do kind of need some long-term solutions.
I will say, though, if he ends up in left field, then this probably was a poor trade for them, because as much as he may hit, the difference between Francisco Mejia, the hitter he is as a catcher, and now second base, third base, that's a little different story. But if he goes from catcher to left field, well, then that's a big drop down on the defensive spectrum and the value that you get. Now again, it may end up happening, but this trade works out much better for San Diego if Francisco Mejia can prove that he can catch, even at an average level. We're not talking about above average defensively, but even at an average level. If again, second or third, he is small for a catcher. Second or third, he does have a really good arm. Maybe that would I'd still say, you know what? If he ends up being an above average third base, then that would still be fine. But left field, well, then you went from a very demanding defensive position to one where you can find guys who can play left field, as we see, all the time.
It'll be interesting. I will say, though, I think the first three trades we've seen, I think they've kind of set the market. There were some early ones. We saw the Mariners go get Denard Span and Alex Colomé. We saw
the Nationals got Kelvin Herrera.
But I think we have kind of seen what the prices are. Now, given that, moving forward, a lot of the starters on the market have not performed particularly well in the lead up to the deadline. Tyson Ross has had a good start, but that followed a couple bad ones. Jacob deGrom being moved would shock me. Same with Noah Syndergaard. Aces, you shouldn't.
Especially now with hand, foot,
and mouth disease. Yes. So I'm looking more at the relievers. I think we're about to see a run. Again, we'll see. A lot of these guys have warts as well, but you see the Zach Brittons, you see the Brad Bracks, you see, over on the Reds, the Raisel Iglesias, and even the guys ahead of him, Jared Hughes, David Hernandez. What for you is going to be the most interesting thing and most interesting dynamic for you as we get here in this final week and 2 days of the trade deadline?
I would kind of put it as if you're in the contention and you don't make a move to make yourself better, I kind of ask the question, why not? Because we just talked about the cost for many of these players is going to be very modest. So we have a lot of teams that are out there looking for relief help. A lot of teams. I mean, we can rattle down the list. I mean, again, like for instance, if the Braves, who are right there in the middle of it in the NL East, if the Braves don't trade for a reliever of some sort, it would be shocking because they need relief help. But you have a lot of teams that could use relief help. It's almost hard to find a team that doesn't need
just
some.
To put this in perspective, right? The Houston Astros have the second best bullpen ERA in the majors. They're looking for extra.
They could
absolutely use extra.
So the reality of it is it would almost, again, it's almost asking the question, if you don't make a move, because there are enough teams out of it now, that if you don't make a move, at a very modest in many cases, like, again, let's say, again, hypothetically, that the Braves make a move for a reliever, and let's not talk about like a elite closer, but they could use guys to just, okay, this is a guy we can depend on in the 6th, or we can depend on the 7th.
Or even a situational lefty.
Right. Those kind of moves, those are, I'll take on the salary, and I'll give you a low-level prospect. That's what those moves are. And again, like to flip it, a year ago they were a seller. Again, starting pitching-wise, they could use one back of the rotation starter. Okay, well last year, guys like Jaime Garcia are going for Huascar Ynoa, who's a good arm, who's in the Appy League. Those kind of trades, everyone can make those. There's not a team that doesn't have talent in their farm system to make those if they're willing to take on. And we're saying take on salary. We're not talking about taking on $15 million. We're talking about taking on 2.
And that's where the interesting move to me is going to be. I think I'm looking at the Texas Rangers right now because they're a team that's out of it. They desperately need an infusion of arms into their system wherever they can get them. You have Cole Hamels still, who, while not the ace he once was, is still a very good left-handed starter, especially taking into account the home park he pitches in. Shin-Soo Choo, by the way, would represent a massive outfield upgrade for a good chunk of the contending teams out there.
Which, by the way, is great news for them because there was Shin-Soo Choo. There has been a stretch where he was probably not tradable.
Now, his contract makes things interesting, which goes back to the taking on salary. There are reports out there the Rangers would be willing to eat some of it to help get a better prospect. I'm gonna be fascinated to see what they do. We saw them, essentially acquire Austin Jackson to get a and then DFA him to get a prospect from the Giants. To me, that's the most interesting team. And to me, frankly, when you look out at the market right now, the best starting pitcher truly on the market. Again, you never really know with the Mets. They're such a mess that maybe they do something silly. But with Cole Hamels, that's the one that we say, okay, he probably is truly on the market. That's the best starter, truly on the market. Shin-Soo Choo, right now, given his offensive production he's produced as a left-handed hitter, he might be, whether
One
it's
of the
number
best.
one, but one of the top 3, 4, 5 potentially available hitters on the market. His salary is going to
Although his contract, again, is
going
going to make
complicate things. So to me, that's going to be what I'm going to be watching the most here, what the Rangers do and what teams come at them with package-wise in terms of how much salary they're willing to take on.
One of the things I'm going to look for is you mentioned Britton and Brad Brack, but the Orioles should trade literally anyone who's not.
They have Adam Jones. They have Mark Trumbo.
Anyone. Jonathan Scope. Okay, you probably don't want to include Jonathan Scope in a deal.
He's selling low potentially.
Right. Okay.
They're
got a couple of rookies that you wouldn't because there's no reason to trade them. But other than that, anyone else.
You look at guys like Bundy and Gausman. I think that's a perfect example. They're young-ish. They're in their 20s. They've produced well, not exceptional, but well. And if you're the Orioles, okay, you have guys who are in their 20s. They're under reasonable contract. They've performed well enough to keep. Do you still move them?
The one argument against it is you don't want to trade Jake Arrieta again. Didn't work out well for them. But no, I would say with the Orioles, the problem with the Orioles going to have is that we do not know what the Orioles' direction is going forward. So
they've said at least they're going to commit to a rebuild, but there's some front office moves expected to come that could affect that.
There are a lot of people in that situation who are with the Orioles who are in the final year of contracts. We don't know who's coming back. We don't know all that. But I would say with the Orioles, anything that's not nailed down, okay, the warehouse is behind, the outfield, no, they stay there. But Adam Jones, they have to, again, they should be trading Adam Jones somewhere, because it's good for Adam Jones because.
Still producing offensively, center fielder, can absolutely help teams.
Right. And it's good for them because they don't need to give at-bats to Adam Jones the rest of the year. They need to give at-bats to Cedric Mullins and guys like that and see, let's just find out what Cedric Mullins can do for a month and a half, 2 months. And so I look at the Orioles and I because again, I do see pieces that they have that other teams would want. Like you look at a team, you mentioned the Rangers, but you look at the Royals. Again, the Royals, if you want Alcides Escobar, if you want Lucas Duda, if you want Michael Stockus, who's the best guy they have to offer, all of those guys should be available. Now, again, they made a move yesterday that I did like, which was they brought in Brian Goodwin in a pretty minor deal, traded away an arm that they got out of the Frontier League not that long ago.
An A-ball reliever who's 23, and maybe
starter right now, but future reliever.
He's been relieving in the regular season. He started in camp, but he was relieving for Lexington.
And some starting in Idaho Falls though too, if I remember correctly. But so you were talking about, that's the situation where they're just every move they're making is looking at 2021 and beyond, 2020 at the earliest.
And Goodwin, while he's an older guy, is locked up through 2023. So
right.
There's still a lot of years there.
They're looking at that. Okay, is that probably an upgrade over Paulo Orlando long term? Paulo Orlando's really old for a young guy because he'd been around for a long time. So they're making moves like that. You look at everyone at the bottom, and we say every one of these teams, because we have teams that are absolutely positively out of it, and we have teams that, again, there are so many teams in it that there is a lot of demand out there. There should be.
We talked a little bit about the sellers. For me, mentioning the Rangers, you mentioned the Orioles and the Royals. The buyers, what's going to be interesting to me is you made the point that every team now can make an upgrade, and for the Red Sox and Diamondbacks in particular, I think that's really relevant because. Let's just be frank. Neither of those teams have a great system right now. Mm-hmm. Both of them have top prospects who are hurt. Jay Gruden for the Red Sox, John Duplantier for the Diamondbacks, and even their 2-3 guys have some hiccups that, whether it's injuries or some other issues right now. So now that those teams are going to be able to put together, we've got the 4-player package for the dynamite difference maker.
But there aren't main dynamite difference makers out there anyway on the market.
And so that's where, to me, I'm still going to be curious to see what these teams can do, what they can orchestrate. And I think the Red Sox and Diamondbacks in particular are going to be two teams I'm going to be watching very closely.
I completely agree. And again, you look at it like the Diamondbacks last year, they trade away Sergio Alcantara, Dawel Lugo, and Jose King.
And get
J.D. Martinez. Which, as trades go, slam dunk, do it 1,000 times. And so
even on a lower level,
they can, and again, they have the pieces. If you said we need to give an equivalent package to that to get a player this year, they can do that 1,000 times. A Dalton Varsho-led trade right there.
No, broken hammock complicates it.
But you know he's coming back from it. So yeah, you do look at it and you say, okay, the same way that, you just look at these and you say, these are guys, they have guys in their system who are better than the players they traded in that deal last year. So
probably fair guess.
So again, willingness to take on salary for a rental, you can make trades that seem like it's like, oh, they don't have a great farm system, they wouldn't be able to make that. Same thing with the Red Sox. The Red Sox, under their current regime, use their farm system as trade chips most of the time.
To great success, we do need to.
And the point I was going to make is that, but if you look at it, I do not know with, maybe there was the Thornburg trade would be one exception. But probably with that exception, almost every other one of these trades they made, you'd say, yep, you do it again, and again.
Craig Kimbrell deal, the Chris Sale deal, they have no regrets, nor should they.
Drew Pomeranz deal even. No, right. They're trying to win now. They traded away, like Drew Pomeranz deal at the time. Wow, Anderson Espinosa, one of the better pitching prospects in baseball for Drew Pomeranz. Well, Drew Pomeranz pitched reasonably well for them. Obviously, he's moved on since.
Well, he's hurt right now.
Yeah,
He's given them three years of taking the mound every day and done some good things for
them at times. Yes. Whereas Anderson Espinosa, we're going to be waiting for him. We are still, his ETA to arrive in the majors is still in the semi-distant future because he's got to get healthy, and then he's got to get the innings to get ready to get to the majors.
It'll be interesting to see in particular. I think we talk about those two. At the end of the day, there are some heavy hitters here. The Astros. They're, they don't
have a whole lot of needs.
They're, first or second in most offensive end pitching categories. The Dodgers are coming back up. We've seen the Yankees.
The Dodgers' depth right now is such. That's the thing that stands out.
We've seen the Yankees who, because they've graduated successfully so many players, may not have the dynamite prospect chips in the past. But again, there's plenty of guys there that are talented and teams would want.
Well, you look at the Yankees. The Yankees came in the season, and Brandon Drury was expected to play a significant role for them, and he found himself in AAA because he had an option left because they didn't have room for him on the roster. Again, the depth that they have really does stand out. You look at. I look at Houston, and the biggest move that Houston may make, and he hasn't hit so far, but they brought up Kyle Tucker and. I can't tell you that there's a left fielder on the market who is better. Kyle may struggle. He may. He's a rookie. We'll see how the adjustment period goes. But that's as good an option as pretty much most any team has it on the trade market. You look at their rotation, they not only have a 5-man starting rotation that basically has taken the turn every time out, all of whom are good. But then you say, they have guys who've been starters for them in the past
who are in the bullpen.
Who are in their bullpen who, if they had an injury tomorrow, you go, okay.
Move them up.
Colin McHugh, here you go. You're back in the, whatever. They have guys to move in the rotation. And then they also have depth still in AAA of guys. Miles Straw is not a top 100 prospect right now, but Miles Straw is one of the faster guys in the minor leagues who steals bases and
exceedingly good clip. He can do things to help a major league roster.
Where you say, if you brought him up on August 31st, or let's be honest nowadays, September 5th, and said, oh, by the way, this one guy's hurt, you want to put him on a playoff roster. He's a good defender who can throw in the outfield, and he's a pinch runner. Okay? That's a useful piece.
You'd rather bring that up in-house rather than, we're going to trade for Cameron Maybin, which they did last year.
By the way, someone out there should trade. Someone should trade for Terrence Gore. Terrence Gore is sitting on a Royals minor league team. Not going to go to the playoffs that way this year. We know that, because I think they're almost officially eliminated. But Terrence Gore can help a team, as a pinch runner who basically steals bases. Okay, you put him in, he steals the base for you.
There's a couple teams in the middle that I think are interesting to me. St. Louis was a team, they fired Mike Matheny right before the deadline, and then they came out of the break with 8 of 11 against the Cubs. they've already kind of, we're starting to see them fall back into the sellers category, and the Cardinals have not been sellers, it feels like, in my lifetime.
In a while.
It's going to be, Carlos Martinez got hurt. I don't think they would have traded him, but it was a good point.
I mean, again, because this is not a team that feels to me like a team that's saying, we're tearing it down to rebuild. Which, to me, trying Carlos Martinez at this point would be we're tearing it down.
But I do think there's some interesting, whether it's a Jed Jerko, a Jose Martinez, guys who can play a couple different positions, provide you a little bit of impact bat. I'd be shocked if they moved Matt Carpenter, especially considering how good he's been. But that would be the interesting move to me, because if the Cardinals do decide, okay, we've missed the playoffs for 3 straight years now, we're stuck in the middle, we need to really reboot something here. We talk about impact bats. Carpenter is, over the past 7 weeks, I should say, he leads all of baseball in OPS.
I watched him have one of the best days I've ever seen just last week.
I think that'll be interesting to me, seeing what the Cardinals do. And to a similar degree, the Nationals are another team in the middle. I don't expect them to sell. They know this is the last time they have a chance with all these guys to really go for it, and I expect them to go for it. But it's nonetheless just interesting watching how this is. And maybe by August, if things have really fallen apart, if they try and do anything on the waiver deal wire.
I was going to say, because the thing I would say with the Nationals is that the other thing that they have back of their head they have to have is that the 2 teams that are ahead of them are young teams who maybe they are absolutely legit and 2018 is their year. But also maybe these are teams that they're going to run out of gas because they got a lot of players who play bigger roles than they've ever played before, and maybe they start falling back to them.
Especially on the pitching side.
Exactly.
We've already seen Nick Pivetta start to take some steps back in the Phillies rotation. Sean Newcomb was looking great, and he's, there's been some bumps.
Right, so again, if you're saying that, you're saying if you're the Nationals, maybe we make 1 or 2 moves, we just try. Because, again, at the end of the year, it's going to be ugly anyway with some of the guys they're going to lose, so...
And here's where it's interesting with the Nationals to me. If they decide we really do want to go for this is our last hurrah, there's a catcher in their own division, JT Realmuto, who, by the way, besides Manny Machado, would be the best player on the block when you consider his position, his performance, his age, and his contract.
It'd be a bigger trade. He's a bigger trade chip because of all those pieces.
And if the Nationals, if it was, hey, you got to trade Victor Robles and Luis Garcia and Carter Kieboom, if you're the Nationals and you decide this is what we want to do, you do it, and I don't think you look back on it. You need to upgrade the catcher. It's a lot to give up, but that's what it's going to take to get a player of that caliber. And considering, you can say, all right, we've got Trey Turner, we've got some other guys who can fill in around. If you really believe you're going to give this a shot, if you think this really is your last hurrah,
that would be a massive package. That is 3 top 100 prospects, and as right now as we stand, there's been 2 top 100 prospects traded. Robles is more valuable, higher ranked than any of the prospects been traded so far. And then you're talking about, again, that would be a massive
trade. And essentially, maybe it ends up being one of Kieboom and Garcia, which might be more realistic. But the point is, to get someone of that caliber, the Brewers need catching help as well. I think that would be the most interesting.
They've made trades before.
It's right. If the Marlins were to make JT Realmuto available, I think that would be kind of the thing that would reverberate around the trade market and shake it up. I could also see the Marlins saying, you know what, we have some young players who are playing well for us this year. We're starting to see some returns. Let's hold on to him. This is our leader. And they would be completely justified in doing that, and I would not fault them one bit.
It would be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens.
Absolutely. All right, well, for J.J. Cooper, I'm Kyle Glaser. We'll be back after the trade deadline to recap everything that's happened on July 31st. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.